Welcome back to Mean Streets here on Game Plus Network. Chris Meaney here with you, and super thrilled to bring in my next guest, Pete Jenson of the NHL Network. You can give him a follow at NHL Jensen. Make sure you are following along at NHL Fantasy. He is the co-host of the NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast. And I'm just super excited to talk to Pete for one and talk hockey. You guys all know I love hockey. It feels like just a couple days away now, a few days away from actual preseason game. I know the rookies are playing each other, but preseason action. And Pete, before you know it, the NHL will indeed be here. You guys have a ton of content already over at NHL.com. I was going through it yesterday. You guys have covered absolutely every single base, projections, rankings, sleepers, guys on new teams. You just had team win projection totals, which is something that we'll talk about here throughout the show as well. Thanks for taking the time, man.
Oh, absolutely. Always great to talk pucks with you, especially this close to the season, right? This is when all our hockey content really starts to spike. It's heavily consumed. We love your show. We love when you come on our show. We're trying to cover it all together and project as best we can, right? There are always going to be some variables that we don't know until the puck drops or shortly after, but we do it the best we can here, and it works out well every year. So yeah, and also our forward point projections are going to be on the site momentarily. So definitely check out those as well. As whether you're in a points only league or in a categories league, it's a fun time to be a hockey fan for sure.
Yeah, people play in all kinds of crazy leagues. So it's nice that you're trying to cover every single setting out there. We'll talk a lot about high stakes hockey, NFFC here, the bangers leagues, like Eric Young likes to say, a new addition over at FTN, and he'll join us when we preview another division. You and I are going to run through the Atlantic Division. You just finished up a podcast this morning. I don't know if you were able to get in the Kevin Hayes news just before we came live here. 6 to 8 weeks of abdominal surgery. So it looks like he's going to be out, Pete, for the first, I don't know, maybe month and a half of the season. I don't know if you have any initial thoughts on that right away. But Hayes is, a solid two-way player for the Flyers.
He is, and even though he's not in our top 250 rankings prior to that news, he's a really valuable player. And of course, when he first came to Philly, he made a big impact. And he's just like a surefire secondary scorer that when he's there, it's like kind of like Couturier. It's like those are the two most important players on the Flyers. So take one away, I think any progress they made this offseason in terms of steering the ship and making off-season slight upgrades, I would say, that gets lost a little bit here. So not having your number two center. So I was a little worried about the Flyers to begin with, and certainly some of the players on defense with how poorly things went last year. Ryan Ellis, one step forward, two steps back, you could say, maybe with Ristolainen and Keith Yandel from a defensive standpoint. Those guys can score with the best of them, especially when they're on the power play. But yeah, just a little worried about the Flyers because we're talking about, somebody coming out in favor of maybe the New York Rangers. Who's it going to be? Is it going to be Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh's a darn good team every single year, no matter what adversity they face. So I think the Flyers are even a step behind a team like Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I would agree. I like the Ryan Ellis edition, but there's some other questionable ones there as well.
Right.
Maybe Cam Atkinson can give them some firepower, but they're going to have to keep pucks out of their net. That's the biggest thing when it comes to the Philadelphia Flyers. Let's talk about the Atlantic Division. One team has no issue keeping pucks out of their net, the two-time defending Stanley Cup champions. That's where we're going to start here. The Tampa Bay Lightning, not favored to win the division. Make sure you check out ftnbets.com for our prop shop where you can get the best possible odds. These odds are all from DraftKings. They're plus 210 to win the Atlantic. Most spots have them as plus 150. We'll get to the Leafs, but they are favored over at DraftKings. So we have the Bolts here, 7-1 to win the Stanley Cup again, three-peat. Their over-under for point total is 106.5. You have them for 55 wins over at NHL.com. A goalie tandem wins, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong there in a second. I just put basically their top few players. Now, as you see on the board, there's no Alex Killorn, no Anthony Cirelli. Those guys are certainly interesting to me, but Nikita Kucherov, the brackets is where they're going, where Yahoo has them ranked. And if you're doing drafts on ESPN, it could certainly be different. High stakes leagues will have an episode for you people that are playing in high stakes leagues. Things are very different. The scoring, kind of caters to heavy goal scorers, heavy volume shooters, and guys who throw their body around. Like Brady Tkachuk is a as a lock and loaded first round pick in those leagues. Nikita Kucherov going as the 4th pick in Yahoo. Braden Point, 18. Andre Vasilevskiy, 21. Victor Hedman, 28. Steven Stamkos, 30. So you got 5 guys here inside the top 30. Andre Palat, 67. And then I put Anthony Cirelli in my own notes as a guy that I do like at 251. He's got center and right eligibility. Alex Barré-Boulet is my sleeper here, Pete, at 864. So not really thought about in Yahoo drafts, and we're still early there. He only played 15 games last season, scored 3 goals, 15 minutes per game. He may have a role on this team. As you know, that entire third line, one of the better third lines in the NHL, and a big reason that the Bolts have won 2 Stanley Cups in each of the past 2 seasons, gone. Yanni Gourde, Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman, gone, and David Savard also gone. Corey Perry, if you can't beat him, join him, I suppose. He's lost to the Bolts in each of the last 2 seasons in the finals, and now he's a member of Tampa Bay. He's not ring chasing. He already has one, but good for Corey Perry. What do you make? I mean, what can we really say about this team, Pete? I guess I'll go with Vasilevskiy. Are you willing to spend a first-round pick on him? He was a top 5 player in fantasy hockey last season, just with your standard goalie categories. Are you willing to spend a first-round pick on him? How are you attacking the goalie position in most of your drafts?
Well, I think that there's a lot of separation between him and the next best goalie, whether you think it's Hellebuck, whether you think it's Kemper now with the Avalanche, or whether you think it's Robin Lehner as the sure starter now that Fleury's gone in Vegas. I still think, as much as I like those 3 other guys, there is a lot of separation between them and Vasilevskiy from a volume standpoint. He's still the most likely goalie to reach 40 wins, even if they, kind of do some load management. He could win 40 games in 55 games. He's like a, crazy workhorse, and does it in the regular season year after year. And now he's starting to do it in the playoffs too. So he's really the full package, best goalie in the NHL, probably over the past 10, 15 years combined is Andre Vasilevskiy. Compare him to some of the greats from 10, 15 years ago, and he stacks up and he's even better. So yeah, I would take him in the 6 to 10 range. I wouldn't reach for him in the top 5. We have Vasilevskiy at number 6 behind McDavid, McKinnon, Draisaitl, Kucherov, and Matthews. So interesting, right? 2 Tampa Bay Lightning players in the top 6 overall, and that's coming off another Stanley Cup run. So they've played a ton of hockey all in a short span with the abbreviated season, and then of course last year's run coming like less than 12 months compared to the prior time when they went on the other run. So that's one concern for the Lightning, de-emphasis on the regular season a little bit. But I would, to answer your question, spend a first-round pick on Vasilevskiy toward the middle to later half of that first round. And I wouldn't think twice about it, because from the save percentage to the wins and everything in between, nobody's better than Vasilevskiy.
Is that correct? When I have on the board here, NHL.com 55 wins, that's what you project for the Bolts this season? That's a tandem between, I guess, Vasilevskiy and Brian Elliott?
Yeah, so it's 55 wins, not counting, obviously, overtime shootout losses. That always skews things a little bit, gives one team, if they lose a ton in overtime and shootout, a couple more, it makes up for a couple of fewer wins, something like that. But we do think that the Florida Panthers are neck and neck with the Bolts, whether it comes down to a playoff series, looking way ahead to next postseason. If they meet again with Ekblad, with Sam Reinhart, I mean, with Spencer Knight having even more experience, I think you could say that would go 7 games, not 6, like it did last year. So, yeah, we think they're neck and neck. No team is deeper than Florida right now. You look at the top heavy teams, nobody's better than Tampa Bay with 5 in the top 30. But the depth of the entire roster, especially the forward group, is insane in Florida's favor. So Florida's the deeper team right now, and they still have the stars to kind of tangle with the Bolts in the regular season with Huberto and Barkov. So exciting year to stack Florida Panthers players. I would put them at the top of my list if I'm looking to stack 3 or 4 players from one team this year. Nobody's more attractive than the Florida Panthers to me.
I agree, actually. We'll get to them in a little bit more, just in a little bit more in depth, but you're right. I mean, they have a lot to offer. That series was very entertaining. They just didn't get the goaltending. And I thought they outplayed Tampa at times, it's just the special teams weren't great. I mean, you just can't take penalties against Tampa Bay. You see how lethal their power play is. They just score so easily, and it's not even really to fault the three goalies that they played in that series, and Spencer Knight and Chris Driedger and Bobrovsky, who looked, I mean, he picked up one of the two wins that they had, and he was very strong in that one game and still allowed like 3 or 4 goals. Is there a bust on this Tampa team? Like Stamkos, you say you have ranked inside your top 30. I don't know if it was just like he's getting a little bit older, if it was just, another cup run and he dealt with the injuries in the last playoff run, the first time that they won the cup 2 years ago. I don't know. I'm seeing 15 minutes per game. He wasn't a point per game guy. He was still fine. I just feel like maybe I'm a little hesitant to draft him. I don't know. Are you fine with drafting him? I think a little bit older, and Pete, injuries just seem to pile up with Stamkos over the past couple of years. I don't know. I saw a guy in the playoffs who looked a little slower to me. Am I overthinking this?
Yeah, I mean, Stamkos is definitely on the decline in his career. I mean, still a top flight player. I just think it's interesting that he's no longer like the number one center on the Bolts. He's no longer on the Bolts top line. Remember, as recently as 2 seasons ago, when he was healthy, that line was, had Stamkos with Point and Kucherov all stacked together. Now it's Palat up there. Palat's in a contract year. That's one guy, if he's not on first power play because Kucherov's back, Kucherov missed the whole regular season. We've been talking about him recently. He brings the hits coverage, but will the points be there like they were last year? Will he be a top 75 overall player? If you invest in Palat in that range, could be disappointed if his role changes a little bit. I think it's interesting too, pertaining to Stamkos. I mean, like Killorn was really strong in the playoffs, near point per game. But if you remember, the Bolts were not really trending in the right direction the final 2 months of the regular season, really. And Cirelli had very few points in that span, and he's playing with Stamkos at even strength. So if you look at Stamkos to at least some extent as a shell of his former scoring self when he had like 50, 60 goals a year, and then you look at the fact that his center, Cirelli, is not a fantasy game breaker. Yes, he could be the one out of those 5 guys that does not finish in the top 30 overall, either because of injury or because of any of these other role changes, position changes, circumstances around him. And just the fact that Stamkos is, let's face it, a secondary scorer at this point. He's not their top line guy anymore.
Right. No, he isn't. And I'm sure Tampa can do multiple things with their lines. I expect Kucherov and Point to stay together. Kucherov takes the entire season off and just doesn't miss a beat at all. 32 points in 23 playoff games. Point has 23 points in 23 playoff games. A point per game. Wow. I mean, he couldn't back up what he did 2 years ago in the playoffs with 33 points in 23 games. That duo is absolutely electric. Those are for sure fire targets for me. I like Vasilevskiy. I like Hedman. I'm a little hesitant, like I said, on Stamkos. We'll see how these lines shape out. I think we'll see Palat start on that top line and then Killorn. Some talk out of Tampa that Cirelli could just play on the third line. Now, they could have him center and then Stammer goes to the wing, and then we have Killorn on the second line. And, we saw a little bit of regression. He had the high shooting percentage 2 years ago, and he comes down a little bit in terms of his goal scoring, but he's still a solid asset as well if he's going to play in a top 6 role and get some power play time. And most times he was playing on that first power play unit, which is so absolutely lethal, like we talked about. So I just think with Alex Barré-Boulet, if Cirelli does play in the third line, we could see him play maybe in a top 6 role in the second line with Stamkos or with Killorn. So maybe just something to keep an eye on. In a standard 12-team league, probably not, but in deeper leagues, keeper leagues, he may pop up this season. Pete, we'll take a break. We talked about the Bolts, the defending Stanley Cup champs. Let's talk about maybe the most overrated team in the NHL. Jokes aside, the Toronto Maple Leafs in here next, and also more on the Florida Panthers. We're going to continue the Atlantic Division preview with Pete Jenson of NHL Network. Keep her locked. Let's start with the Toronto Maple Leafs here in this segment. They are 9-1 to win the Stanley Cup. They're plus 195 to win the Atlantic, so they are favored according to DraftKings, these odds. And they have the same point total as Tampa, 106.5. You guys have them for 46 wins. Really kind of the same team, different in goal, but the same squad. Like they're up against it. And I took a shot at them last segment. They're a really good team. They're going to score goals. They're going to be a team that wins a lot of hockey games again. The division is different this season. It's not just the Canadian teams, which where they were beating up on all season last year. We're talking Florida. You got Boston in here again, Tampa in here, the rise with the Senators, and we'll get to the Habs in a little bit. Also, Detroit is an improved team as well. So it's a tougher division than last season. You got Austin Matthews. Yahoo has him ranked as 9. I think is a not a fair ranking. I think this is a for sure top 5 player. Mitch Marner at 14, John Tavares at 37, Morgan Riley at 53, Jack Campbell 73, and Peter Marazzi, who they acquired at 75. So you really have to choose one or the other when it comes to these goalies, considering where they're getting drafted. And Frederik Andersen, now a member of the Carolina Hurricanes. William Nylander, I like that at 110. I mean, this guy had a pretty strong season last year scoring goals. My sleeper is Michael Bunting. I don't think I'll have a lot of shares of Bunting, Pete, because I live north of the border. I play in a lot of fantasy hockey leagues with Leaf fans. People will reach on this guy, but there's an opportunity potentially for him to play on the number 1 line because Zach Hyman is no longer a member of the Leafs. I mean, what's the next step here for Toronto? Like, what can you say about this group of forwards? It's like now or never, it feels like.
Right. They had the stability, at least with their top line before. And then, the second line was really strong with Tavares and Nylander. And now you have to factor in, like, who's going to fill those couple of spots. Like, they have Kasha and Richie that they got from the Bruins that they signed on, like, discount deals. They also have another wrinkle with Nick Robertson, Jason Robertson's brother. You expect him to make an impact at the NHL level one of these years. Last year was, kind of injured, didn't really play. But of course, this year it could be him, could be Bunting, who I remember last year actually had some scoring flair for a pretty mediocre team in the Coyotes. He came in, he had multi-point games in 2 of his first 4, including a hat trick. So this is a guy, even when the scoring was drying up in the desert for the Coyotes, like he came in and made a big impact. He had 10 goals and didn't even play close to the full season. So, yeah, as far as Bunting, hit the hope with him as a deep sleeper is that he lands on the top line at even strength. I mean, the power play there is loaded. There is not a spot up for grabs. That's one of the things that's good about Hyman going to Edmonton. He could actually play on power play 1 as the 5th guy in Edmonton. So I like him more going to Edmonton than I did as primarily an even strength guy with the Maple Leafs. But yeah, for me, it's just about, like, I don't think they necessarily got any better. The goaltending could be better as a collective unit with Mrazek and Campbell, but I don't even know if I think the Leafs will be a playoff team. We have them 4th. That'll put them right there with teams like the Penguins and, Montreal. They're a little ahead of Montreal in our projections. So, but we don't have them as a shoe-in playoff team. So that tells you that we have some concerns about the group. We have them behind the Lightning, behind the Panthers, and a hair behind the Boston Bruins even for a playoff spot.
Yeah, it's been years since the Leafs have won a playoff series, and they were up 3-1 against the Canadiens. I mean, this is, like I said, this is it for this squad. It's really about the postseason. If Mitch Marner can score goals for them, if they can take that next step. Campbell or Mrazek? Would you rather Campbell?
Yeah, we have Campbell ranked a little bit higher. Last year was definitely some injury concerns with Mrazek, and of course going to the market where there's a lot more pressure. I know that Carolina has been a great story in recent years, but it doesn't compare to what he's going to be facing in terms of the pressure in Toronto. How are they going to work that tandem? Is it going to be, if Campbell regresses, does he turn into a flash in the pan like where last year he was great, but he doesn't replicate it? And then there's the negative vibes. Is Mrazek inconsistent, or is he the shutout machine that he was with the Hurricanes last year? I think there's really good individual upside with either of those guys. That said, like as a tandem to target and scoop up both guys, I mean, if you're investing in the Toronto Maple Leafs back end and then you're having maybe 2 of your 3 goalies on your roster or 2 of your 4 if you're rostering 4, that's a lot to invest in a shaky defensive team. So I would take either of them individually as my second goalie or third goalie, but I'm not like targeting that tandem and stacking that tandem. I just don't feel comfortable doing so. Tough division,
I don't
right?
either. It's a it's a really tough division. I would just pass on both. I think Campbell is the play over Marazzi, who has dealt with multiple injuries over the past couple of years. Campbell showed, I mean, a lot of promising signs. I think he set an NHL Leafs record for like 10 straight wins to start his.
Yeah.
I think he went right. Didn't he have like 10 straight Ws? Yeah. And I mean, he looked okay in the postseason as well. The Leafs didn't, get the breaks. I will say this about Bunting, and I picked him up in a keeper league that you and I are in. It's a competitive league. I streamed him for, I think, maybe a weekend stream with Arizona, and then I hung on to him a little bit because he is a volume shooter. But what I will say, 10 goals in 21 games, a 26% shooting rate is completely unsustainable. A lot of puck luck when it came to Bunting last season. But if he is going to get an opportunity in a top six role at times, you said it could be Krejci. I agree. It could be Kasha. Both of those guys, if they can stay healthy, I mean, they could pop up time to time. But I think Bunting, don't overreact and draft this guy super early. But if you leave your draft, if you're following along Leafs camp report, and he is getting an opportunity in a top six role on the second power play unit, maybe he could be a decent last round pick for you. Switching to the Florida Panthers as we continue previewing the Atlantic Division, a very strong division, of course. The Bolts, two-time defending Stanley Cup champs. We just talked about the Leafs. And now we have a team absolutely on the rise that I know you like. You got the win projection right there with Tampa, like you said, Pete. There's a lot of studs on this squad. Jonathan Huberto, a top 15 player according to Yahoo, and I gotta agree with that. I mean, he is an underrated fantasy asset too. I think a lot of people are like, nah, I don't want all the assists, but I mean, there's games where he can fill the net as well. Alexander Barkov. Aaron Ekblad, you mentioned the injury. I mean, he was a top fantasy defenseman before he went down last season. Spencer Knight, we saw a little bit of him last season. Sam Reinhart, the addition from Buffalo, and then Sam Bennett, right? Night and day Bennett from Calgary to Florida. This guy was a top 15 fantasy hockey player, especially in leagues with shots and hits last season towards the last month or so. And then a player in the playoffs, too. And then Carter Verhaeghe I put in here as 143, who had a nice season. There's guys I'm missing here on the squad, like Bertrano is a solid player in deeper leagues with shots. He could fill the net. Mackenzie Weegar, I think, is a guy that I think could take the next step forward here. They're 18-1 to win the Cup, which I think is a decent bet. And plus 425 to win the division, I also think is a decent bet. The over-under on their point total is 101.5. Talk to me about the Panthers. Most importantly, I think, Spencer Knight. Is he a target of yours?
He is. He's someone that I'm definitely prioritizing in my drafts. I think that once you get to the bottom end of the top 10 goalie rankings, there's just not a lot there. So you're forced to reach for a guy like Spencer Knight, who's still rookie eligible and was really impressive in the small sample size, or even like Ilya Sorokin from the Islanders. I think you start to shift your focus to the younger guys as opposed to, the Cam Talbots and guys like that, Freddie Anderson, even Grubauer going to the Kraken. So I would take Spencer Knight over any of those guys I just mentioned. And with Florida, it's like Huberto and Barkov have the best supporting cast by far and away of their NHL careers. And you look at Huberto, like you were saying about maybe like the category coverage was a little missing, but he like in the playoffs last year, he led all NHL players in points per game. It was even ahead of McKinnon when it was all said and done. I know he only played the first round, but that was how big of an impact Huberto made. I will be trying to get Sam Bennett in pretty much every draft that I do, especially we have him ranked higher than his ADP. So I would comfortably reach for him anywhere starting around like 75 overall, even though his ADP is a little outside the top 100 in Yahoo. So, yeah, I'm just really high on this team. I think that when you have a player of like Patrick Hornquist caliber and you just like can't find room for him, he might play on the third or fourth line. Like that's really telling for the team overall. Yeah, and they got the prospects to integrate too. So, yeah, we between Uyghur and Sam Bennett, I'm gonna have one of those guys, maybe both, on all my teams this year with where they're going based on ADP. I do think you're gonna have to reach for Spencer Knight if you want to secure him, especially in a keeper league. Spencer Knight in a keeper league is like top 10, 15 overall players, I would say, without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Go get him in a keeper league in a dynasty format. Yeah, I have no problem reaching on him. It could be a bit of a split to start with Bobrovsky. They paid him all that money, which I'm sure they regret. But Spencer Knight, is the future of this team, and it's clear that this team is on the rise. I mean, Sam Reinhart, look at the goals that he's had in Buffalo: 23, 17, 25, 22, 22, 25 in 54 games. Like, this is a proven 20-goal scorer. Sam Reinhart with Calgary last season, 38 games, 4 goals, 12 points, minus 14, 13 minutes per game. He goes to Florida. In 10 games in the regular season, he has 6 goals and 15 points, covering absolutely every category, playing 18 minutes per game and getting top power play time. And then in the postseason, he has 5 points in 5 games, playing 20 minutes and 55 seconds per game. Again, covering every single category. Can give you some face-off wins. Will throw his body around. If you're playing in leagues with penalty minutes, he'll provide that as well. There was a shot that somebody took at Anthony Duclair, and he just dropped the gloves right away. Like, he is just a category filler. I am a big fan of his as well, Pete. If we are drafting together, you better get him before me, dude, because I will be trying to get him as well. We'll take another break, and we'll turn our focus to the Boston Bruins. No David Krejci this season. Maybe an opportunity for Charlie Coyle to step up and be fantasy relevant. Don't go anywhere. Mean Streets continues here on Game Plus Network. Boston Bruins. Let's get to this Bruins squad. Last year, I was wrong. I'll just take the L. I thought that they wouldn't be as impressive, and they kind of were. They went through their moments. I just feel like this team is on the decline. Like, Patrice Bergeron's a little bit older. Brad Marchand's a little bit older. Now they lose David Krejci. I just didn't like their blue line, Pete. That was it. And Tuukka Rask didn't play all that great. Now it's just a whole new team in goal. David Pastrnak, you see the Yahoo rank there at 7. Brad Marchand at 10. Patrice Bergeron at 33. Charlie McAvoy at 55. Linus Ullmark they bring in from Buffalo. Pretty strong numbers considering he played for the Sabres. And then Jeremy Swayman, a rookie last season who played really well as well last season. 97 for Ullmark and 103 for Yahoo on Yahoo for Swayman. So very similar to the Leafs duo. It's like you got to kind of choose one or the other. I suppose Swayman could maybe go under the radar. People are just going at Ullmark. And then Taylor Hall, who they found a way to bring back last season and looked pretty decent in the playoffs. My sleeper here is Charlie Coyle. The Yahoo rank is 362. An opportunity for him, Pete, maybe to, be the second line center for this team, who's played in the third line role since he was acquired by the Bruins. No David Krejci is going to be a new look for this Boston squad. What do you make of Coyle?
Well, Coyle has had a 56-point season before at the NHL level. I forgot about that, but I mean, that's something that you can look back at as a comparable scenario, and he's playing in the top 6. I know he played some wing through the years, but he's been a center pretty much exclusively with the Bruins and has come to play in big moments during some of these deep playoff runs through the years, where he's actually put up decent point totals in the postseason playing on the third line. So they will miss Krejci. They will miss Tuukka Rask until maybe they sign him mid-season if the goalie tandem isn't going so well, or if he's healthy and can add to the equation. But I do think it's going to be a pretty even split. A lot of people are high on Ullmark as a sleeper or breakout player, and they're reaching for him. I'm fine with reaching for him, but it's like there are concerns defensively with the Bruins. We saw that in the playoffs outside of McAvoy, who's an absolute beast. I would reach for McAvoy, and especially if he's on first power play, he's going to put up monster numbers. He also covers hits, but I just have some concerns defensively. I would take Swayman as like a, if you sit back and maybe get him as your third goalie from a pretty stable team through the years. I think he's going to play well and be efficient for your team, but in fantasy. But the Bruins in the middle rounds and late rounds are not a team that I'm flocking to, other than maybe Coyle, just because he's going to get a great opportunity. He deserves that, and he's proven before that he could perform at a high level even when he's on the third line. So I would take a late round flyer on Coyle. I'm not so sold on like Foligno if he's going to be the second line left wing. Like Craig Smith, I feel like loses value from Krejci leaving. So yeah, it's one of those things. The Bruins are one of those teams like Washington and Pittsburgh and some of these other teams out there with some veterans, and they're just getting worse and worse gradually each year.
Yeah, you just wonder how much they have left. So you and I are on the same page when it comes to their defense. Like, Grzelcyk is a guy too. When he's healthy, the ice time was there and getting some PP time, but it was just an inconsistent season from him overall, and he has some weaknesses on the blue line, and the entire team does. I agree with you. McAvoy is a target for me. I'm not into Patrice Bergeron. I think Marchand is fine. I think I would just rather target other left wingers. Pasternak I have no issues with him. Like, he is just he's a volume shooter, and he's a guy that's going to score at least 30 goals this season. The upside for him is a 50-goal season. We've seen it before. His shot props usually 3.5, 4.5. He's one of the I'm projecting volume shooters and goal scorers, like I'm sure you have him ranked the same way. He's like a top 5 guy. He loves to shoot the puck, and he's very, very good at shooting the puck. I would take the under on the 103.5 point total for the Boston. Welcome back to Mean Streets here on a Game Plus Network. Chris Meaney and Pete Jenson of NHL Network here with you. Make sure you follow Pete Jenson and check out NHL on Ice, the fantasy podcast. He is coming at you. He's going to get you absolutely prepared for the season. We have saved the best for last, as I joked. The Canadiens, nobody saw this coming. The biggest fan in the world didn't see this coming. They made it to the Stanley Cup Finals, and they got bounced in 5 games against the Bolts. Here's what we're looking at for fantasy players. Carey Price, top 60 pick, no thanks. Just avoid this guy. Jake Allen's going to play a lot of hockey for the Habs. Nick Suzuki, Cole Caufield, Brendan Gallagher, Jeff Petrie, Tyler Toffoli, Mike Hoffman, and the sleeper Christian Dvorak. So Shea Weber is not going to play this season. He may not play again, which is a big hole on the blue line. I like Jeff Petrie, Pete, as a guy who has been an underrated fantasy asset. The ice time's going to be there. The top power play time is going to be there. He can throw his body around. He's going to block a lot of shots. I think he's like he's going to be ranked for me as a top 15 defenseman, and you're not going to see that, I don't think, elsewhere. What do you make of this Habs team? More importantly, I think Cole Caufield. Is he a target?
Cole Caufield has a very high ceiling, especially in the goals department. I mean, there's a realistic chance he could score 30 goals, and I love his line mates when they're Toffoli and Suzuki. So, yeah, I think he's the most exciting player and goes hand in hand with Suzuki from a fantasy standpoint. Obviously, Toffoli had a great season last year. Maybe he's not as good, this coming season. He's one of those guys that was a little banged up in the playoffs with the deep run. So we'll see if that affects him at all. I'm not, so big on reaching for Toffoli or reaching for Carey Price anymore, but I do think you'd be, you're in good position if you're able to land Petrie, say, as your number 2 defenseman in fantasy. He's going to cover hits and blocks, and he's going to get you a lot of power play points. He's going to score a lot of points in general. So he's going to have most of the book covered in terms of the standard categories and plus blocks, if your leagues count that. You got to view Petrie as a top 10, 15 defenseman if your league counts blocks. So, I'm excited about him. As far as like sleepers, 2 guys I'm looking at, like Dvorak was a stealth little signing or trade that they pulled after they lost to No and Kokoniemi. And then even Alexander Romanov. I mean, like, I think that with Weber gone, that's a big storyline for me with Montreal. Like, are they going to give him a bigger role? He was maybe in the doghouse a little bit at different points, but, came to play in the playoffs when he got some opportunities and could get an expanded role with Weber gone for the entire season. Like, that's a huge loss for Montreal. And he's a young guy with upside that maybe could tap into that and use that unfortunate situation for the team to benefit himself fantasy wise and, more regular top 4 placement in the lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. Dvorak is going to have some good wingers too, in Gallagher and most likely Mike Hoffman, who does a good job at filling the net. 50-1 to win the cup, no chance. To win the Atlantic, 35-1, no. And I would take the under on 89.5 points. I think it's going to be a struggle for the Canadiens, but I like the young core. I would make Suzuki and Caufield a target. I'd pass on Gallagher, but Petrie, 40-plus points in each of the last 4 seasons.